This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Evan and the show is always live and broadcast from our studios right here in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now, there's been a breakthrough in Burkina Faso. A draft deal to end the crisis has been reached. We'll be live to the African Union shortly. On this Monday morning, South Africa is battling to shrug off the historic defeat against Japan. Our question of the day asks of you, can the Boks come back to still win the Rugby World Cup? Some say it's a pipe dream. We'd like to hear what you say. At SABC Newsroom is where you can interact with us. Today, it's World Peace Day, 21st of September. We look at the state of peace efforts globally. Later, there's Donald Trump, who's had a tough weekend, on the campaign trail in the United States. Also, we look at the looming antibiotics crisis that is facing South Africa and the wider world. We'll also try and speak to Simon Burke, who's in the Bok camp in England, and talk about the mood there. Can't be good. But first, let's get the day's news from Anine Domal.
Good morning, I'm Anine Domal. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. An announcement is expected today on an agreement on Burkina Faso's return to civilian rule. The South African leaders managed to find a solution to the political crisis in the country. Under the agreement, the country's election is likely to be postponed from the current date of October the 11th. Last week, soldiers from Burkina Faso's elite presidential guard seized the country's interim president and several ministers. 10 people have been killed and dozens wounded since the coup. In the northeastern Nigeria, there has been no clear indication of the number of casualties after 3 bomb blasts rocked the city of Maiduguri. Some reports have suggested that at least 8 bodies have been recovered after the blast. There has also been no immediate claim of responsibility for the attacks, but terrorist group Boko Haram is suspected of carrying out the attacks. In Gauteng's East Rand, 2 people arrested for the killing of twin brothers who were necklaced in Equatwa are expected to appear in the Davidson Magistrates Court. The brothers were laid to rest yesterday. The Ekurhuleni Metro Police Department has described the arrest of one of the suspects as a massive breakthrough. The brothers had been accused by the community of being members of a gang that had terrorized them. Thousands of protesters are expected to picket at the Pharrell Williams concert in Cape Town later today. At the weekend, the Western Cape High Court granted permission for 16,000 supporters of pro-Palestinian group BDS to protest outside the venue at the Grand West Casino. Williams is participating in a promotional collaboration with local retailer Woolworths. BDS in South Africa wants the retailer to stop stocking Israeli goods. And social media is still abuzz with Emmy News congratulating Viola Davis on becoming the first black woman to win an Emmy for Best Leading Actress in How to Get Away with Murder. The hit show Game of Thrones won the Emmy for Outstanding Drama Series, while HBO's political satire Veep took the prize for Outstanding Comedy Series. John Hamm also won his first Emmy, taking home the prize for Best Actor in Mad Men. Or remember, of course, you can get all of those news on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for SABC Newsroom. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anine. Now, there seems to have been a breakthrough in Burkina Faso. Although a recent military coup has derailed the country's democratic transition, there are indications that an agreement has been reached on the country's return to civilian rule. An announcement on the progress is expected before midday today, that's Central African time. Last week, the interim president and members of his government were detained by the Presidential Guard. Reports suggest that at least 10 people have been killed and more than 100 wounded in street clashes with soldiers since the coup started. Now, the country's first democratic elections for decades are due to be held on the 11th of next month, but are now likely to be postponed until November, it is thought. To give us the latest, we are joined via Skype from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia by the spokesperson of the chairperson of the African Union, Jacob Eno Eben. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us once again. Good morning, Jacob. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Eben. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, loud and clear. Jacob, just give us a quick update. What's the very latest on the news coming out of Burkina Faso that you are hearing?
Well, the news coming out from Burkina Faso is that an agreement is close to being reached. So we're looking forward to having the details of these agreements. But I just would like to take you back to the Peace and Security Council of the African Union that met on Friday. And basically, one of the decisions that was taken was to suspend Burkina Faso, but also just gave them kind of an ultimatum to revert to the situation post-ante within 96 hours. And these 96 hours will definitely be expiring probably the next less than 30 hours, say by the close of the day of tomorrow, the 2nd of September. So we're looking forward to having a return to the transition government that is going to lead Burkina Faso back to its first democratic elections in 3 decades.
Jacob, the announcement later today, there's an announcement expected to be made around midday. Do you have any information about what would come out of that?
Well, our expectation from the side of the African Union is that, one, the African Union had condemned the coup and that the power will return to the transition government led by transition president Gonda. And it's important that power returns to the civilian rule and that the country gets back to its track to electing a democratic government.
Jacob, do you have more information about the demands of the coup leaders and even the reasoning for the coup? Do you at the AU have more information for us, maybe?
Well, from what we are hearing on the ground, as you know, the transition process had put in a system where they were going to have different candidates to put in their nominations, different parties to put in their nominations for the various elections, both the legislative, presidential, as well as local elections that are expected to. The presidential and legislative elections were expected on the 11th of October, and the local elections were expected in January 2016. Now, to enable these elections to take place, there were conditions that had been put in place. And these conditions didn't seem to have pleased all the parties, particularly those that were of the deposed government of former President Blaise Compaoré. And so that seemed to have triggered a situation where those who were not retained as candidates for the presidential election seem to have gone down with some level of discontentment. That's triggered this situation. But as we speak, what is very important is that peace reigns, that the stability returns to Burkina Faso, and that they continue in the trajectory that they had agreed in November 2014 to.
Well, it seems as if we've lost the link there. That is the AU commissioned spokesperson, or the spokesperson of the chairperson of the African Union Commission. That's Jacob Eno Eben, giving us their views on what has been going on, for the last week or so in Burkina Faso. Of course, elections are scheduled for the 11th of next month in that country. Those elections look like they'll be postponed now, possibly until sometime in November. Now today, it's World Peace Day. Officially, it's known as the International Day of Peace and is observed annually on September the 21st. It's dedicated to world peace, specifically to strengthening the ideals of peace both within and amongst all nations and peoples. International Day of Peace was established in 1981 by resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly to coincide with its opening session, which was held annually on the third Tuesday of September. Now, the theme of this year's commemoration is Partnerships for Peace, Dignity for All, which aims to highlight the importance of all segments of society to work together to strive for peace. Now, the South African Institute for International Affairs researcher Aditi Lal Bahadur is with us this morning. Very good morning to you, Aditi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Such a massive concept, peace. World Peace Day. Firstly, tell us your views on World Peace Day. Should we have a World Peace Day?
Well, I think it's important. Peace is important to the world. But I think the sentiment behind this particular resolution in 1981 was quite specific in that it was actually talking about creating a day of official ceasefire throughout the world. And in that way, it was basically sort of talking about that regardless of what circumstances are, we can put down our arms for just one day and observe non-violence. So I think it is an important day to observe, particularly given the amount of conflicts that we're experiencing throughout the world.
You talk about the amount of conflicts. It seems as if there are almost conflicts on every continent right now around the world. How do we get people to put the guns down, even if it's just for a day?
Well, it's really difficult, right? Because I think the sources of conflict are actually really sort of multifarious. If you look at, and they're very sort of deep and historical in nature. If you look at something like the Israel-Palestine issue, for instance, it goes back millennia almost. And then you've got, again, like the Burkina Faso incident that you were just talking about earlier as well. The sources of that kind of conflict are also very different. So I think the key to it all is to particularly peace advocates of peace studies would propound, is to really interrogate the key drivers of what causes conflict in these areas. And it really depends on the situation.
When we look at the world and the kind of systems that we have in place, we've got democracy fairly well spread around the world. We have capitalism intertwined in this. Is this the best system or the best combination to try and look at the possibility of peace, or should we look at something else?
Well, I mean, that's a very loaded question. I think that it really depends on your ideological stance. For sure, I think the argument that has won, or the viewpoint that has won over the years, particularly since the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, is that actually democracy and what they call a liberal peace is the end goal. And I think that really stems from the idea that conflict is inevitable, whether it's an interpersonal conflict or interstate or intrastate conflict. Where there are people, we will always have differences of opinion. Democracy seems to be the only mechanism through which, or the best mechanism through which, we can resolve these conflicts in a peaceful manner. So, that's
You've done well in answering the loaded question. I'll say that. Let's talk about the role of the United Nations. Can the United Nations do better in peace efforts around the world? The role that they play within peace around the world, is it working?
Again, I think it's a highly contested, a highly political space. In as much as peace, we would like to think of peace as being a value sort of free issue. It really isn't. So one person's, the sort of adage, one person's freedom fighter is another person's guerrilla terrorist type thing is something that the UN faces on a daily basis. So I think that, particularly if you look at the South African government's perspective, there is a great sense that the UN Security Council, for instance, can do a lot more, but it is hamstrung by the veto powers of the P5, the permanent 5 members of the UN. So something like Syria, for instance, it's a really contentious issue, and you can see it's sort of building up, like the pressure's building up, particularly with the the refugee crisis that Europe is facing at the moment. It's an easily resolvable situation, but it is hamstrung by the veto of Russia, of China. So South Africa certainly, as a government, is actually advocating for a reform of the UN Security Council so that it can become less politicized and more sort of driven towards peace.
Your specific focus is Southern Africa, and we've always been seen as a very stable and peaceful region. But in recent times, we've seen flare-ups in Lesotho, for instance, Madagascar, and even instances in Zimbabwe. How do you view that?
Well, I think Southern Africa is still, compared to other parts of Africa and other parts of the world, relatively stable in orientation. And I think that if you look at these three examples that you've given in particular, they actually speak to internal challenges that they're facing. It's not Zimbabwe waging war or declaring war against South Africa or anything like that. So it really is actually the result of the conflict in these spaces is really the result of a reflection of the internal political systems in these countries. So I think on the whole, as much as there is conflict to be resolved in Southern Africa, it still is largely a peaceful region.
Well, I thank you for joining us. The elusive world peace that we always look for. Let's hope that one day we can achieve it in all of our lifetimes, one would hope. Thank you, Aditi, for joining us. That's Aditi Lalbahadur. She's a researcher with the South African Institute of International Affairs. Of course, the September 21st globally is World Peace Day. That is today. Now, there's no peace in the Springbok camp. Springbok loose forward Skalk Burger says the Boks need to pick themselves up following their shock 34-32 reverse to Japan. That was in their World Cup opening match in Brighton on Saturday. Burger says the team is going through a really bad spell, and senior players now have a vital role to play in turning around the Springbok fortunes. Eddie Jones masterminded the greatest upset in the history of World Cup rugby when Minnows Japan defeated the mighty Springboks. Views have been varied on social media, as you can imagine. Despair and a lot of unhappy people have been on social media. Let's take a look at a few. We'll go periodically in and out of our pages. Rowan Simpson says, "Theory, the All Blacks really want to be on the same side of the draw as the Springboks for the knockouts." Yeah, thanks, Rowan. Richard says, "Now what I expected from the Springboks, not what I expected, but congrats to Japan." And we have to congratulate Japan. It's not the end of the world to lose. Michael Tucker, rumor has it the Heineke Meyer didn't choose any Lions players because they kept on running at the gaps. So, nice one, Michael Tucker. Of course, Heineke Meyer's taking a lot of flack. The thing is, the scripts have already been written. We're just living out the days. Springbok's fate is already sealed. Says they must know. They obviously know something we don't know. Ben Howard says Japan went for the win against the Springboks when they could have settled for a draw. Onwards, you cherry blossom. Yes, very brave nation. There you have. That's the second try scored by Japan of the three that they scored in the match. Of course, it seemed as if the South Africans were standing behind the posts quite too many times on Saturday, late Saturday afternoon. Now, time for our picture of the day. This one from The Telegraph, and Telegraph Rugby, and its caption, "Japan shock the world of rugby and Twitter goes crazy." Yes, it is. Twitter did go crazy. I think a lot of South Africans went crazy for what happened at the weekend. Now let's take a look at the front pages from around the globe. We start in Europe, where the Times says Britain is facing a national crisis over dementia, with an analysis showing that a third of babies born this year will develop the condition unless new treatments are found. Then in Nigeria, here on the African continent, the Vanguard reports that fresh multiple explosions have rocked Ajilari Railway across the Komari Airport, the ward of Maidigiri's metropolis, leaving scores of people dead and many others critically injured, according to residents living around the affected areas. Then, finally, New York, the International New York Times says ahead of yesterday's election, Prime Minister Alexei Tsipras is campaigning to be returned to power after bruising bailout negotiations that split his party in Greece. Now let's take a look at what's happening here around the country in South Africa. We start in Johannesburg with 2 people arrested for the killing of twin brothers who were necklaced in Ipwatwa are expected to appear in the Davidton Magistrates Court. Then in Cape Town, a man alleged to have been part of a gang that raped, stabbed and slit the throat of a Valencia farmer 16 years ago now is expected to apply for bail in the Blue Downs Magistrates Court there. Then also in Cape Town, a 31-year-old man is due to appear in the Bellville Magistrates Court. That's in connection with raping 12 women in the area there. The suspect was arrested last week. Police say he lured the women into bushes near the local railway line before raping them and stealing their money and other personal items. Of course, the rugby world reacted with praise and astonishment after Japan pulled off the biggest upset in the sport's history with that last gasp victory over South Africa in the opening game of the World Cup. Now, before last night, Japan had not won a World Cup game since 1991, while South Africa has twice lifted the trophy in 95 and 07. Addressing the media, Japan coach Eddie Jones said the win would boost interest in rugby in Japan, where the sport is yet to match the popularity of baseball and football, despite the launch of the semi-professional top league there in 2003. Well, we're going to take a short break. You're watching Newsroom right here on SABC News.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Ispantola is only dance that you can't find anywhere in the world. It's purely South African.
Melting plastic and manipulating it into his desired image.
The whole idea was not just to do a normal portraiture, I wanted to do something that will tell a bit of story.
He may be gone, but Masonda's voice will continue to serenade music lovers for a long time.
Join Refulo Muila on your one-stop arts and entertainment show every Saturday on Afro Showbiz News at 7:30 p.m.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom now. Antibiotics are effective for curing acute bacterial infections, but South African doctors may be overprescribing the medicine, which could lead to profound negative effects on our long-term health. But this is not the only concern. Drug shortages and the misuse of antibiotics could send us back into a pre-antibiotic era, according to a report that was released last week. With South Africa also having high tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS figures, antimicrobial resistance is also a great concern. The World Health Organization's statistics show that in 2013, an estimated 480,000 people in 100 countries developed multi-drug resistant TB. These increasing figures are a serious threat to global public health and require immediate action. Now, joining us today is a professor of respiratory medicine and the head of the Department of Medicine and Lung Infection and Immunity Unit at the University of Cape Town, Professor Kirtan Deda. Very good morning to you, Prof. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, and good morning to your viewers, and thanks for having me.
Now, the studies show there's a growing number of populations developing resistance to general antibiotics due to overprescription by GPs. Do you agree with that statement, and how do you see it?
Yeah, I think in general terms that statement is correct. The first thing to say is that there is overuse of antibiotics generally in our health systems and in the general population. So 80% of the antibiotic use, in fact, is in the animal food chain, and only 20% in the human chain, so to speak. And of those antibiotics used in humans, about 80% is in fact prescribed in primary care by GPs and level 1 doctors. And for example, a recent study showed that up to 40% of prescriptions for so-called infections where bacteria were involved were inappropriate. And in the main, for example, common colds, flus, throat infections, acute bronchitis, in 95% of cases, in fact, are due to viral infections. And so traditional antibiotics don't work. And the net effect of this, in fact, besides side effects and costs to the patient and to the healthcare system, is that one selects out for resistant bacteria. And this can affect that particular individual later on, but more importantly, is passed on to other individuals, and this increases the overall burden of bugs that are resistant to antibiotics in the community. Now, the net effect of this is that when these bugs do cause disease, they're much more difficult to treat, they're much more expensive to treat, and more importantly, they cause excessive suffering and even death. And so, as you know, at the 69th World Health Assembly in New York, this emerging problem of antimicrobial resistance, as it's called, has been labeled an international public health emergency. And just to give you some idea of economy of scale, this has now been benchmarked to be as important as the phenomenon of global warming.
Yeah, this is certainly a grave concern. In a country like South Africa and in the life of an individual, what advice do you give to a person who wants to get out of the antibiotic space, if we can call it that, or how do we lessen our dependence and our use of antibiotics?
Well, I think one needs to look at where antibiotics are being misused. So the first thing to say is that we need to address the problem of inappropriate use of antibiotics in the animal food chain. So what's happening here is that antibiotics are used in animal feeds to prevent infection and to prevent growth of the animals and really to make farming more profitable. And the net effect of that is that genetic information from bugs in these animals is passed on to bacteria that affect humans. And in fact, in the European Union, for example, use of certain antibiotics are banned in animal feeds, and in the United States of America, they're also considering passing such laws. So that's the first thing. The second thing, as far as the general public goes, and the use of antibiotics, as I just said, a lot of it is in the primary care setting, but a substantial amount also occurs in hospitals, and that is about general education about antibiotics. There's also an expectation amongst patients who visit their GPs to get antibiotics, right? A lot of people think if they go to their GP and they don't get antibiotics, then that's a bad GP. So there are pressures from both sides, and I think education of the public and of the medical community is critical to reduce the use of antibiotics inappropriately.
TB, tuberculosis. Now, that's another concern right now. It appears to be undergoing a strong resurgence with new strains coming to light that don't respond to what we call traditional drugs. What do you think are the reasons behind this? Is this similar?
Well, just to sort of give a little bit of background to the viewers, so many of them may have heard of MDR TB or multi-drug resistant TB, and that's resistance of the TB bugs to the two key TB antibiotics. And now we have XDR TB, which is an even more resistant strain, and alarmingly, we now have totally drug-resistant TB, or incurable strains of TB, in fact, that are circulating in the communities of South Africa. And we described this in a paper in a journal called The Lancet last year as part of our research findings. Now, we traditionally thought that it was a fault of the patients and the healthcare system, and that is one important fact. So in other words, people were not taking their drugs correctly, or there were drug stockouts and so forth in the healthcare system, or the medication was not being prescribed in the correct way. However, whilst this is an important phenomenon, it's now become apparent that there are many other factors that drive resistance, and in fact, we can't get away from resistance. Even if you take your medication perfectly and appropriately, a certain proportion of bugs over time will become resistant due to various factors, for example, varying drug levels in patients, poor penetration of these drugs into, for example, different regions of the lungs. So antibiotic resistance is inevitable, and the problem has been is that for the last 4 decades we've had hardly any new TB drugs. However, it's only been in the last several years that, in fact, we have had 2 new TB drugs registered, one of them called bedaquiline, which is now being used on a limited basis in the National TB Program. But as I said, it's a combination of factors, health system factors, poor adherence to drugs, in combination with other factors that are important in driving this resistance. But it is a major problem.
What about the drug shortages we see in South Africa? How does that tie into this problem and maybe even make it worse?
Well, I think it is a factor that is driving resistance to some extent amongst many factors. And drug stockouts can be due to many reasons. In some cases, it's not the fault of the healthcare system. It's in fact a problem with manufacturing or delivery of these drugs. There are also problems with procurement of the drugs and distribution of the drugs. So often the problem may be on the side of the healthcare system or the Department of Health. Things like corruption, maladministration, mismanagement of tenders, all these factors play a role. And so you get drug stockouts. And the net effect of this is, firstly, that patients may make their drugs last, so to speak, and so will take suboptimal doses. Or often out of different antibiotics, they just take 1 or 2. And this, of course, will select out for resistant bacteria and drive the overall emergence of resistant bugs in a population or community.
Well, Professor, thank you for joining us this morning. That's Professor Kirtan Dera. He's at the University of Cape Town. He's, head of the Department of Medicine, Lung Infection and Immunity Unit. We're talking about resistance to antibiotics and how this is a massive threat that's playing out without us really having a major focus on it. Take less antibiotics if you can, and we have to find a way to take, as the professor said, we need to find a way to take the antibiotics out of the animal feeding chains. That's a major threat to humanity at large. Now, with the help of the author of Connect with the Continent, Terry Bien, Newsroom keeps you updated on what's happening throughout the African continent. Recently, Terry was in Nairobi, Kenya. Now, I have to tell you, he's shooting on iPhone, and at times the sound can be a little bit dodgy. It's nice, though, to see what's happening elsewhere in the continent. Terry Bien shot this on iPhone, so apologies if the sound at times is not optimal.
So I'm here with Evans Campbell from iHub in Nairobi, Kenya. iHub is a tech innovation center, amongst other things, but Evans, iHub is really well known in Kenya, but for those outside of Kenya that don't know what it is, can you tell us a bit about it?
Okay, iHub is a pod co-working space, so it's a space for people to work together. It's a pod pre-incubator for people who have ideas to work on them and build on them, and it's also a pod vector for investors. So we connect startups looking for funding to investors looking to fund.
Okay. So what kind of people does iHub attract?
We attract mainly university students and university graduates, but they're from a range of interests. So we've got designers, researchers, programmers, people who are just interested in tech, so enthusiasts. And that's the kind of breed of people we attract.
And what do they do when they get here?
They connect with each other. They work with each other on projects. They also build out their own ideas, and then they get the advantage of training sessions that we have with various organizations and partners.
So Evans, one of the most interesting parts of iHub is the UX lab. What does that do? And can you explain to people what UX is?
Okay, so user experience is mainly derived from design thinking, which is a school of thought around putting the user of any product at the center of your development of the product. So the user experience lab provides the service to clients.
One of the other, fascinating projects, which I think people can learn from across the continent, is one of the other initiatives you're incubating at the moment called Gearbox, which is sort of a rapid prototyping facility. I think people are very familiar with prototyping in engineering, but not necessarily in the technology space. What kind of projects do you hope Gearbox is going to produce into the future?
So it's good you actually mentioned about the engineering bit, because now what Gearbox is looking to do is provide a platform for both that software angle that is required in engineering, because it also uses very high-tech software, with the engineering bit, which requires machinery.
So very much ideas like Brick, similar to that. Those are the kind of projects that we want to see coming out of that center. Are there any plans to take this to other countries outside of Kenya?
So we don't plan on doing that, but we do plan on sharing our knowledge with the rest of the continent, and we are a founding partner in that respect within AfriLabs.
If you had a message to young tech entrepreneurs across Africa, what would it be?
A lot of questions we get from young entrepreneurs are usually about how they have an idea and they're looking to take it forward and they don't know how. Just find out, look for as much information as you can, and information really is power when it comes to tech.
So there you have it. There is no shortcut to success. From Evans and Terry in Nairobi at iHub, we wish you a good morning.
Again, apologies if the sound was not to your liking on there. It's just we're shooting these segments, we're shooting on iPhone, and at times the sound is a little bit, well, not what we used to in broadcasting. Now, South Africans, of course, have been on the internet, it seems, since Saturday night to express their shock following the Springboks' 34-32 defeat to Japan in the opening match of the World Cup. They used the hashtag stronger than the box. We scouted the internet, and these are just some of the humorous memes that we could find. Can we have a look at some of the memes? Here you choke, official soft drink of the Springbok. That's not nice. You get a penalty, you get a penalty. Everyone's getting a penalty. That one is Oprah Winfrey there. If you can support us when we lose, you don't deserve to be there when we win. There's that iconic picture of 1995. It's not a matter of how hard you fall, SA Rugby, but will you stand up? That's what South Africa wants the Springboks to do, is to stand up and be counted. And of course, then there are other ones. There's Mr. Miyagi in the Karate Kick Kid talking about you catch the ball like this and you pass the ball like that, saying that, well, Japan don't have a rugby history. Well, they have a great rugby history. They have 50 years of a rugby history, and there you have chopsticks with the Springbok in it. These have been, well, one of, feels like hundreds of memes that have been on the internet all along. It's been a tough couple of days for South African sports supporters. The Springboks in the biggest upset of all time at Rugby World Cup, going down to Japan. Let's go to our Facebook page and have a look at what is on there now. KwaZulu Natal Premier Senzo Mkunu says they are worried that the leadership of the taxi industry appears not to be taking steps to end taxi killings that have been witnessed there. Then at least 5 people were killed in a suicide bomb attack yesterday in the northern Cameroon town of Mora, in what appeared to be the latest cross-border attack by Boko Haram's Islamist militant group. And heavy fighting erupted over the weekend between forces from Libya's recognized government and Islamist militants in Benghazi, killing at least 6 and heightening tensions in UN peace negotiations. Now, for more news updates, just search for SABC Newsroom on Facebook. Now, today's tweet of the day. This one comes from Ollie Barrett, a journalist. And, well, it was an amazing tweet. He said, amazing from South African fans as we leave Brighton. Congratulating Japan supporters for their team's performance, shaking their hands. The other one said they made a guard of honor. South Africans made a guard of honor as the Japanese fans got onto the train in Brighton. Wonderful South African spirit. We'll have to win, South Africa, but we can also take a defeat. Time to take a break.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Let's do this.
Several thousand migrants are adrift in boats in Southeast Asian seas.
The refugees have been abandoned at sea by human smugglers with little food and water.
The UN has appealed to the governments of Thailand, Indonesia and Malaysia to act quickly to avert a massive humanitarian crisis.
Leaders will meet in Dar es Salaam on Wednesday to discuss the political crisis in Burundi.
At least 19 people have been killed and more than 200 wounded during violent protests against President Nkurunziza's bid for a third term.
Primetime News, daily at 6 p.m.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. An announcement is expected today on an agreement on Burkina Faso's return to civilian rule. The South African leaders managed to find a solution to the political crisis in the country. Last week, soldiers from Burkina Faso's elite presidential guard seized the country's interim president and several ministers. 10 people have been killed and dozens wounded since the coup. In northeastern Nigeria, there has been no clear indication of the number of casualties after 3 bomb blasts rocked the city of Maiduguri. Some reports have suggested that at least 8 bodies had been recovered after the blasts. And in Gauteng's East Rand, 2 people arrested for the killing of twin brothers who were necklaced in Etwatwa are expected to appear in the Davidson Magistrates Court. The brothers, who were laid to rest yesterday, had been accused of being members of a gang that had terrorized the community. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just simply search for SABC Newsroom. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Ian, back to you.
Thanks, Anine. It's been a tough weekend for South Africa's rugby supporters this after the biggest upset in World Cup history. Yesterday proved to be a more normal day at the tournament. Let's just take a look at the results from yesterday before we carry on and get an update from Simon Burke. There you have Pool B, Samoa, that's our pool. They beat the USA 25-16 in the early match. Of course, Wales hammered Uruguay. They're in Pool A, and I can tell you that South Africa, if we go through, will face a team out of Pool A. And then Argentina, well, they gave New Zealand quite a scare before the All Blacks hung on for a 26-16 win. Now, if we look at the pool standings are very interesting. There you have Pool A, Wales at the top at the moment, along with England after one match, of course, on points difference. The Welsh are in first place. Australia, they only open their account on Wednesday in that pool, and they're favourites to top that pool at the moment. Pool B, South Africa, well, 2 bonus points for South Africa could prove crucial in this pool. If they win the rest of their matches, they could still top the group against all odds, some people would say. Pool C, there you have New Zealand at the top. Of course, they couldn't score the bonus point against Argentina, but very much favourites against Georgia, Tonga and Namibia. So it looks like New Zealand will be top of that group. Then the final group, of course, Ireland got the bonus point. They are ahead of France in that group, with Romania, Italy and Canada bringing up the rear. Very much looked like a 2-horse race in Pool D. But let's go across now to Simon Burke. Don't forget, our question of the day is, can the Boks come back to win the Rugby World Cup? We'll ask Simon Burke that question just now. But Simon, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Evan. How are you doing?
It kind of feels like a World Cup hangover Monday here in South Africa, Simon. What is the mood like in the Boks camp this morning?
Yeah, no, the mood is they're very somber. They're saying that they're going to pull it all together against Samoa. That's going to be like a final for them. That's what Skalkberg has been saying. We actually are in Edgbaston in Birmingham, And we've gone to look for the cricket ground because I think we're also trying to put it in perspective and try and figure out what's going on. And obviously, Edgbaston is one of the sites of the cricket team's biggest sporting calamities. I think the box just upped them in the stakes. And so, you know, it's just kind of ironic that they've shown up in Birmingham, of all places, to lick their wounds and get on with things. I don't know what that means. As I say, we're off to the cricket ground to see if we can figure out why what's happening in South African sport. But where once the Springboks were the top of the tree and could do no wrong, they suddenly just, pulled a wild card and became the national team, one of the big three who pulled off the worst performance in all of sporting history, I think, in South Africa.
It's absolutely the case. We see a lot on social media about the Springbok fans in the UK. They behave themselves in an exemplary way after the defeat. Some of them made a guard of honor for the Japanese fans at Brighton railway station. But what's the mood like amongst the South African fans that you've seen in England, Simon?
Well, a lot of the South Africans that are around in England are the expats. I don't think there's a lot of travelling supporters. We certainly haven't seen any making the trip over, but we have seen guys, especially in Brighton, that came down from London for the day to support the Springboks. And obviously they're all your expat type of variety, very, very homesick, very, very keen to be involved in anything South African. Also just gobsmacked. They'd never expected this, never in their wildest dreams. It's incredibly tough to get World Cup tickets here in England. They've made the process so involved. You have to apply months in advance. So a lot of these people got their tickets. You know, they live in London. They live further up north. They made the trip down only to bear witness to a historical day. So I suppose in one respect they can always tell their grandchildren where they were, but it's not the kind of thing you really want to tell your grandchildren, is it?
Not at all. Simon, tell me quickly, a lot has been made about the performance and about old players and injured players and the like. Do you expect quite a few changes to the starting lineup to our next game over the weekend coming? A lot of criticism has come the way of Jesse Kriel, for instance, in midfield.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, you know, Meyer shows quite a strong team. I mean, there weren't too many people out there that were missing, but there were key guys there that were just not showing up on the day. But as a collective, I mean, watching that match in the stadium, it just never seemed like the Boks got comfortable. They were, the surroundings sort of got to them. It wasn't an imposing stadium by any means. It was just always flat. It never picked up. And I think Mayer's probably telling his guys, this is it. This is absolutely it. It's Samoa or bust, basically. And he showed his hand sort of with the Japanese team. And he's just got to keep going now. He's dug this hole 4 years in the making. He never, ever wavered from his initial plans and all of that. And now he's just got to reap what he sowed over the course of his tenure. And it's not looking good, but perhaps they can pull it off against Samoa. They might do.
Simon, thank you very much. As a Baina Kamea classic, when plan A fails, reinforce plan A. Anyhow, in other sporting news, that was Simon Burke, mind you, on the line. We'll get him on the line a little bit later in the week again to give us an update as to what's happening in the Boks camp and also. But this was the story of the weekend. Ajax Cape Town, they are the 2015 MTN8 champions. That's following a 1-0 win over Kaizer Chiefs. That was at the Nelson Mandela Bay Stadium on Saturday. The MTN8 Cup, played between the top 8 finishers from previous league seasons, was won by a single goal from veteran striker Nathan Paulse. And I tell you, the Nelson Mandela Bay Stadium was packed to capacity. 45,000 watched. A famous win for the Cape Town side against their much more fancied opponents here from the city of gold. Lots of different tweets, varying degrees of tweets around this. Let's have a look what the fans have been saying about what was an upset result. Lawrence says, in Rugby World Cup, I still say we can't mix politics with sport. For MTN8, I didn't know Ajax has so much support behind them until today. Yes, there are more than 2 teams in South Africa, Lawrence. Marley Mook says, thanks for sponsoring Ajax Cape Town when nobody else wanted us. The MTN8 Cup is a small token of our appreciation. Make it happen, says Marty Mux. That one from Zigo says, a peaceful weekend it's been, all thanks to Ajax. MTN8 equals money to Naturena, so they say. Sorry to the Amakosi, but you know, sometimes you have to learn to lose. Very much like the Springboks this weekend. There's no defeat in losing. It's about dusting yourself off and coming again. That's where we leave it. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. Don't forget, we also stream live on YouTube at that time with the show available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom, where we love it in the morning.
SABC brings to you Rugby World Cup 20